Greetings, class. My name is Jeff Cogswell, and today I will discuss with you one of the many champions of social justice. The core issue I'm going to discuss with you is that women and African Americans were not treated as equals to their white male counterparts in the labor industries. In the 1930s, there was a growing divide in the United States labor movement in the American Federation of Labor and the Congress of Industrial Organizations. The American Federation of Labor, also known as the AFL, disavowed organizing unskilled workers, women, African Americans, and industrial actions. An industrial action is basically a strike. They felt that by doing this, they were protecting their craft. The Congress of Industrial Organizations, on the other hand, did not agree with this view. Due to this, the AFL split with the CIO. In 1941, women organized into the CIO's Congress of Women's Auxiliaries and held their first convention in Detroit. In this way, the CIO Women's Auxiliaries were an innovation into the labor movement. Then, after an almost 20-year split, the two merged together again and the AFL-CIO was formed under the leadership of Walter Reuther. Following the merger, the AFL-CIO became an ally of civil rights organizations, ultimately playing a huge role in the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. So how does this problem relate to social justice? People of color and women faced exclusion, segregation, and discrimination by the unions. Due to this, women and minorities, specifically African Americans, created their own organizations, fought for inclusion, and pushed the labor movement to broaden its principles of equality. In today's era, organized labor has become an advocate for the rights of all people, most recently including the LGBT communities. They are currently doing this through anti-discrimination and civil rights legislation, pushing for marriage equality, and rallying for the protections of undocumented workers. While there are many pros and cons of the equal rights movement, the pros of the equal rights are fairly self-explanatory. This would be the end of gender discriminating laws, equal rights for all, and allowing women's rights to have a legal basis. Because of this, I just want to take a moment to touch on the cons of the proposed amendment that many people don't think about. Not many people realize there were actually people against this proposed amendment for reasons other than bias and bigotry. So the first con you will see is problems with the language used. The language used in the Equal Rights Amendment was considered tricky because many thought it could lead to confusion, mostly because it left so much room for interpretation. Others said that it would take away some of the rights of women that they have already fought for, while adding others at the same time. Next are the concerns over implementation. The main problem here is that many states thought it would actually be giving the federal government more power over the states. The concern was that many people wanted the federal government to have limited power over the states, and they wanted the states to be able to make their own laws. This law would give Congress the power to enforce any provisions it deemed necessary and violate the states' rights. Next is the military draft. Since the passing of the bill would require women to be treated 100% as equals to men, they would also then be required to fulfill the same roles as men and be eligible and required by law to sign up for the draft. Interestingly enough, this is still one of the topics being debated today in regards to equal rights. Today, the draft is also one of the main reasons there is still opposition to the Equal Rights Amendment, and one of the major factors in preventing it from passing Congress. Lastly, there was a fear that women, both black and white, would be exposed to unnecessary risks. An example of this at the time would be women working in mines. There was actually a rule that forbade women from working in and around mines except in an office or a clerical capacity. Considering that mines provided jobs with better pay, banning women from these employment opportunities was an example of gender inequality in the 1960s. On the other hand, the men in power positions thought that by doing this, they were also protecting women. The dominant groups in this situation are also fairly self-explanatory. White men enjoyed more rights than women and African Americans in the workplace, making the white males the dominant group over the subordinate women, African Americans, and other minority groups. The power elements and the resources. The power elements listed on this slide were all able to come together and assist or play a major role in the passing of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 that was signed into law on 2 July of the same year by President Johnson. This is the bill that finally, after years of work, ended segregation and discrimination against gender and minority groups in the workplace. The most important part of this bill concerning equal labor rights is in Title VII. It reads in part under SEC 2000E-2, Section 703, Unlawful Employment Practices. It shall be an unlawful employment practice for an employer, 1, to fail or refuse to hire or discharge any individual or otherwise to discriminate against any individual with respect to his compensation, terms, conditions, or privileges of employment because of such individual's race, color, religion, sex, or national origin, or 2, to limit, segregate, or classify his employees or applicants for employment in any way which would deprive or tend to deprive any individual of employment opportunities or otherwise adversely affect his status as an employee because of such individual's race, color, religion, sex, and or national origin. Obviously, the resources the power players were after during all of this was to end the discrimination and provide equal pay for all, no matter the race or gender. This brings us to our champion. Though there were many, Walter Reuther was an amazing leader of social justice during this time. So who was Walter Reuther? According to biography.com, Walter Reuther was one of the most prominent labor movement figures of the 20th century, leading the United Automobile Workers Union for decades. He was born on September 1st, 1907 in Wheeling, West Virginia. He traveled internationally before taking up leader positions with the Automobile Workers Union and later went on to head the Congress of Industrial Organizations. During that time, he became a major figure for workers' rights, winning numerous reform changes for the United Automobile Workers. He ultimately died on May 9, 1970, in a plane crash in Pellston, Michigan. Reuther addressed the issues of equal rights in many ways and was a very strong supporter of the civil rights movement. He also enjoyed strong political connections to help him on his journey. Some of his key accomplishments are as follows. He was called upon numerous times for meeting with President Johnson through 1964 and 1965 to discuss legislation and political issues, while championing the needs of his Teamsters, women, and African Americans. In June of 1963, he participated in the Walk to Freedom in Detroit, Michigan, where he was featured as the only prominent white speaker at the event. The purpose of this demonstration was to protest racism and segregation, as well as the discrimination facing African Americans in the North, such as inequality in hiring, poor wages, lowered education standards, and substandard housing. Many say that this, in a way, was a dress rehearsal for the March on Washington that was scheduled to take place 2 months later. The event had a huge turnout of about 125,000 people, making it the largest civil rights demonstration in history at the time. He also helped to organize and finance the March on Washington on August 28, 1963, where he delivered remarks from the steps of the Lincoln Memorial shortly before Dr. King gave his historic I Have a Dream speech. Finally, he served on the board of directors for the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, also known as the NAACP. So what stances did he take? Reuther's stance was really quite simple. He was committed to working people and fought tirelessly throughout his life to improve the rights and compensation of working class Americans, both at the bargaining table and in the halls of Congress. His convictions pushed his belief that the federal government should guarantee the civil liberties of its citizens as he pushed to expand social programs for the less fortunate. Reuther stood for equal pay for equal work, equal rights for women and African Americans, education for social improvement, fairness in sharing the wealth, civil rights, the environment, and increased housing standards for all. A quote of his that sums up his stance perfectly is as follows. I am here today with you because with you, I share the view that the struggle for civil rights and the struggle for equal opportunity is not the struggle of Negro Americans, but the struggle for every American to join in. So how did he do it? Collective bargaining was his main feature. The use of collective bargaining led to equal employment for all. No matter what the gender or race, collective bargaining also led to the improved work conditions and better wages. Collective bargaining remains a fundamental right today and is still an important tool to improve incomes and working conditions, as well as advancing social justices for all. Next, he promoted fair labor standards. Reuther created a special projects division headed by Nat Weinberg that created innovative programs like the Supplemental Unemployment Benefits Plans and the Cost of Living's adjustments to ensure his Teamsters would be taken care of under all circumstances. Additionally, Reuther mandated the formation of the local union Fair Practices Committees in order to promote fair employment practices and to eliminate discrimination in the workplace. This essentially created anti-discrimination regulations to protect women, African Americans, and other minorities. Next, he had to hold long-term progressive positions. Change does not happen overnight. Reuther understood that for any real change to take place, he would have to hold long-term positions and be prepared to fight for his beliefs. Finally, he had to build allies. Walter was once quoted as saying, "If you're not big enough to lose, you're not big enough to win." Reuther knew he could not accomplish his social justice goals alone. He knew there was power in numbers. That is why he stood with Dr. King, merged the AFL and CIO back together, and then continued to build his union base. He understood that by building his base, he could have more control over politics and legislation through votes. He was also so aware of this that he was often quoted as saying, "There is a direct relationship between the ballot box and the bread box." In my opinion, Walter Reuther and the UAW were heroes of the working class. They were well ahead of their time in the sense that they were very keen on the changes in the world around them, and that they wanted to do what was morally right, through a humanistic approach for those not being treated equally. Even though they knew it would be a major challenge to change the mindset of the American people, they continued their fight for social justice. This tells me that Walter Reuther and the UAW were true leaders of their time, and that they still are today. Reuther saw the need for change and acted on it with the support of his union. Even after 2 assassination attempts on his life, he still followed his moral compass to do what he knew to be socially just. The lessons we learned from Reuther and the UAW can still be applied today, just as their accomplishments in equal rights and civil rights are still relevant today. This is not to say that things are now perfect. We still have a lot to accomplish as a country in the way of social justice, but organizations like the UAW are still around and still continue to make a difference by fighting for social justice. Here you will find a list of references I've used to put this slideshow together. I hope you enjoyed the topic, and I hope you are able to take something away from it. Thank you for your time, and have a great evening.